It turns out we're all going to die. Now, I've told you about the Arctic ice melting before, but I'm not playing. Look, we found out about a couple of months ago that a third of the Arctic sea ice had melted, and that was much more than anticipated. Then we found out a couple of weeks ago 45% gone. Now we find out 49% gone. Breaking records every single day. September 16th. Lowest recorded Arctic sea ice ever. Okay, so how's that for fun? Well, it's not fun at all, because it turns out the scientists say, hey, you know what? If it all melts, it creates a vicious cycle. And as you can see there, 2012, watch this. This used to be normal, and then all of a sudden it's moving, melting. Melt a little quicker for me. Well, that's the problem, actually. It's melting way too quick. And what you're going to see here is the area in black is what it would normally melt to in the summer, right? Average for the last several decades. In 2012, the area in white is what it's actually at. So only 49% of normal levels. Disastrous. Okay, now, how disastrous? Well, scientists are ready to tell you. Here is a panel of scientists put together by Greenpeace. They had a get together. Jim Hansen was there, one of the top climate scientists in the world, works for NASA. Here are some quotes. Quote, humans are really running out of time. That doesn't sound good. James Hansen, it's hard for the public to realize because they stick their head out the window and don't see much going on. But the reality is that's because they don't live in the Arctic. If they lived in the Arctic, they'd see a lot going on, which is ice melting in ways they've never seen before. On September 16th, as I told you, Arctic ice covered just 1.32 million square miles, the lowest extent ever recorded, 49% below the 1979 average. And that average held for a long time until recently. And Kumi Naidu, who's part of the Greenpeace International Board, in fact, he's the head of it, had a hilarious line. He said, what happens in the Arctic doesn't stay in the Arctic. And that's so true. And let me just explain that to you real quick. Look, there's several different things that are going on here. First of all, because of global warming, more ice is melting. But when the ice melts, it sets off another reaction, which is that we have less white, as in the ice and the snow, to reflect the heat back up. Instead, the darkness of the oceans and the ground absorbs the heat, thereby making it even hotter. Well, we just built a vicious cycle. Second of all, methane gas that was trapped there for a long time gets released. That makes it worse. And when the ice caps are lifted, you know what they do? They immediately start drilling for oil. In fact, that's exactly what Shell's doing now. So what does that do? Well, that creates more fuel, that creates more carbon emissions, and that makes global warming even worse. It's a triple whammy. Now, James Hansen explains again, quote, there's a huge gap between what is understood by the scientific community and what is known by the public. Unfortunately, that gap is not being closed. What he's telling you is, you're not understanding it. You need to be in a panic. Now, I remember the last time Republicans made fun of a guy who was in mid-panic. They said, this Richard Clark, he's going around the White House with his hair on fire. He left over from the Clinton White House. He better calm down. Who was he? He was the counterterrorism advisor that was telling the Bush administration, Al-Qaeda is coming. Al-Qaeda is coming. Please defend the country. We might suffer a catastrophic attack. Turns out Richard Clark was right. Unfortunately, as you look at the numbers, James Hansen is right. And let me show you one last graph so that you can begin to get a sense of how out of control this is. Now, this was all the little squiggly lines you see are all the projections that the scientists had. They thought, well, look, we know based on global warming and climate change that the Arctic ice is going to melt, and it's going to melt over this period of time. Turns out they were wrong. That red line is the line that actually happened. It is worse than their projections. And you see 2012 there, diving off of the board? Yeah, we're in a world of trouble. The scientists thought it was going to be terrible. It's actually worse. So look, we're already at 0.8 degrees Celsius warmer than we were, and world leaders have agreed that if we get to 2 degrees Celsius, it's game, set, and match, catastrophic climate change. You know that we have to keep 80% of the fuel that we can tap into oil, other carbon-based fuel, etc., in the ground in order for us not to reach that 2 degrees Celsius. Now, with those trillions of dollars that they're going to make off that oil and gas and coal, etc., you think they're going to keep 80% of it in the ground? They're not going to keep it in the ground. In fact, the Arctic melts, they don't see that as a warning. They see it as an opportunity to make even more money from oil. And we're diving full steam ahead, including, unfortunately, the Obama administration that says, oh, yeah. I mean, you want to drill in the Arctic? It'll be fine. It's not like there's going to be any disasters or anything. By the way, in the Gulf Coast, we barely got to the BP disaster, and after months, we finally plugged it, but we had hundreds of airports nearby, thousands of boats nearby. We had all the Coast Guard that could help nearby. If there's a spill in the Arctic Ocean, on top of all of the global warming and climate change consequences, we're not going to be able to stop that spill. It's one disaster on top of another on top of another. And unfortunately, James Hansen is right. The American people don't get it because they are living in a bubble of propaganda.